Welcome back to the Daily Dope. We have good news today, big story, huge story. Let me just take it away.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today in strong opposition to Attorney General Sessions' unproductive and backwards marijuana policies. By rescinding the Cole Memo on legal marijuana enforcement, Jeff Sessions proved that he has one goal as Attorney General. That's reviving the failed war on drugs. These policies have proven to be devastating for communities of color. For example, African Americans are 4 times more likely to be arrested and incarcerated for marijuana possession than their white counterparts. Instead of embracing outdated drug laws, the Attorney General should be working to create a criminal justice system that treats everyone fairly. What's worse, by going after legal marijuana businesses and consumers, the Attorney General is really showing a blatant disregard for the will of the American people who have voted, mind you, voted in their states for more reasonable and fairer laws. That's why I'm proud to introduce H.R. 4779. Actually, we introduced it last week along with my friend Congressman Don Young. It's a bipartisan bill called the Refer Act, which would prevent harmful federal overreach. Also today, we're introducing a bill that will end the federal prohibition. Thank you.
And more on that, ending federal prohibition part of it. Let's just go ahead and check this out. This is from the Business Insider. House Democrats introduced a bill to legalize marijuana and provide restorative justice to communities impacted by the war on drugs. This might sound familiar to some people. It's because Cory Booker introduced the exact same thing in the Senate, and that's been kind of a rallying cry for many activists to just say, hey, why don't you look at this Cory Booker bill? You should call your own personal reps, call them, tell them to sign on to the bill. And really, nobody's really jumping aboard of this Cory Booker thing, even though a lot of people have a lot of stuff to say about Jeff Sessions and his little, crackdown or whatever. So anyway, let's go ahead and read the rest of this here. A group of House Democrats on Wednesday introduced a bill to legalize marijuana at the federal level and expunge the federal arrest records of those incarcerated for marijuana use and possession. The reason this is a big deal, people out there listening, is that, this is where you can hold your personal representative accountable. Now, you can probably already called your senators or wrote letters to them and found out that none of them really have the guts to jump forward and endorse something like that. And even some of the people that haven't jumped on board with Cory Booker's thing kind of surprise you. But, like, for example, I live in Michigan, and neither one of my senators would jump on board. And I wrote them letters, and they said, well, we'll see what happens, but it's still a little early to say. We're going to wait and see how it works out there in Colorado and Washington, where they already legalized it, and see what kind of things happen. And it's like, no, this was, within the last year. So anyway, now you can hold your reps responsible as well. The bill, introduced by California reps Barbara Lee and Khanna, and co-sponsored by 12 House Democrats, is a companion to Senator Cory Booker's Marijuana Justice Act, which Booker introduced to the Senate in 2017. Beyond removing marijuana from the Controlled Substances Act, that's the most important feature of Cory Booker's thing, in my opinion, is a lot of people that have marijuana bills or marijuana legislation in the governments, whether it be at the federal level or anywhere else, even where it's legal. There's states where it's legal for medical or recreational purposes, or both, where there's still their own personal version of the CSA on the state level, and cannabis is still on it, or it's even, Schedule 1 in some cases still. This right here removes it from the Federal Controlled Substances Act, and then lets the state, then the states have to do whatever they want with it. Like I said, a lot of states still have it on Schedule 1, so it'll just still be on Schedule 1 in some of those states that want it to be that way. Otherwise, though, the federal government and Jeff Sessions and his goon squad won't be able to fuck with it. And that's the most important part, in my opinion. Then you can go a step farther. The bill goes a step farther to provide restorative justice to communities disproportionately affected by marijuana arrests and create an inclusive industry from the ground up, Lee said on Wednesday afternoon call with reporters. Now this sounds kind of like a dream situation here on to add on to this, but I've always wondered because everybody's always like, well, we know the drug war disproportionately affected communities of color. Yeah, they basically turned them into war zones and decimated them, and the police there seem like an occupying force and all that kind of stuff. What are you gonna do about it? What's just saying that you want to like give them favor on licensing and stuff like that isn't really enough. I mean, it doesn't seem like it's gonna work. Lee called the legislation a bold proposal to reverse decades of discriminatory drug enforcement and bring federal marijuana policy in line with the wishes of the American people. Here's what the Marijuana Justice Act does. To do that, the bill will create a $500 million community reinvestment fund that will focus on job training and for the nascent cannabis industry and will prioritize communities that have suffered a disproportionate number of marijuana arrests for recreational sales licenses. The bill will also cut federal funding for state law enforcement and prison construction if the state disproportionately arrests low-income or people of color for marijuana offenses, which is happening already in Colorado. Still, people of color are getting focused by law enforcement for marijuana, and it's minors because they got the 21 and up law. So if you're under 21, be it 20 or almost 21 or 18 or 19, you get picked up for a marijuana crime. And this seems to be happening a lot more in communities of color. The cops are just looking to bust these kids. And, we got to do something about that. That's like the 90% of the whole problem of the drug war is like the cops are some kind of a us against them type thing where, marijuana is the biggest deal in the world. It's the reverse of the 1994 crime bill, Senator Cory Booker said on the same call. It creates incentives for states to change their marijuana laws. While the White House bill already has 12 Democratic co-sponsors, no Republicans have signed on to either the Senate or House versions yet. Where you at, Rand Paul? And there's a few other Republicans that are out there. Cory Gardner, I think. There's a couple other people that haven't signed on to this that are Republicans to the Cory Booker one. Senators that talk a tough game about, we should take a different approach to marijuana, or Dr. Rand Paul, how, we shouldn't treat this, it's medicine. He already agrees that medical marijuana is a real thing. So how would he agree that it should be on Schedule 1? Or even, he made a case for Schedule 2 before. But where is he at to get it out of the schedule altogether and let states decide? We know where Jeff Sessions sits, and we know that 29 states have some form of medical marijuana legalization on the books. Lawmakers on both sides of the aisle, including Colorado Republican Senator Cory Gardner, who hasn't signed on to Senator Cory Booker's bill, and California Rep. Dana Rohrabacher, described Sessions' move, which Khanna pointed to on the call, as a sign of the new bill's momentum. A bill introduced by Rohrabacher, which already has 39 co-sponsors, many Republicans among them, would prevent the federal government from prosecuting cannabis businesses and consumers that comply with state law, but does not go as far as federal legalization. That's time for you to come all the way over to the dark side, Rohrabacher. I've been following his activities for a while now, and the guy's a mixed bag for sure. I'm not going to get into other politics or whatever, but when it comes to the politics of cannabis, it almost seems like he don't really care about anything but protecting people that are making money from it. And he does know about medical marijuana, which when it comes to Republicans, it seems like you have to have some kind of injury where you do it yourself or your best friend or your wife or something, and you figure out that it actually works. So anyway, according to a recent Gallup poll, marijuana legalization is a bipartisan issue. 60% of Americans and 51% of Republicans support it. Quote, "We're going to get the federal government out of the state's business," Booker added in an overture to his Republican colleagues. Now let's go back to the Gallup poll. I believe when it comes to Democratic voters, people that identify as Democrats, it's in the 70s. And I think it was like 72 or 3, maybe even 74% of Democrats are for it. Yet we have this problem where in the Senate, nobody really is jumping aboard on the Cory Booker plan. And in the House, we'll see. All right. I know that there's a few progressive Democrats that have been coming in through special elections, and maybe one or two of them won in the 2016 election. I don't know. I haven't really been paying that much attention. But there are people like Democratic Socialists of America. We got Justice Democrats and candidates backed by Our Revolution, which was the Bernie Sanders super PAC or whatever. From what I understand, all of those people that I just mentioned, all of them should be signing on to this like lickety split. And Khanna, in fact, is a Justice Democrat, and I don't want to like not give him credit for that, or not give Justice Democrats credit for him or whatever, however you want to put it. According to all the platforms of those candidates and now politicians, let's face it, all of them are on a platform that says that legalizing marijuana, basically removing it from the Federal Controlled Substances Act. That's the platform I'm familiar with. At least that's the one that Bernie Sanders ran on. And quite frankly, I don't understand why any politician wouldn't sign on to that. However, I also understand why politicians don't sign on to it. There's two things. There's the donors are telling them, hell no, never do it. And that's not only that, I don't know if the donors actually tell them that, but in order to get favor of certain donors, they had to have that position. We know that. And then there's the second thing where, quite frankly, politicians in general still feel like it's a toxic issue that if ran on, when they have to go up for re-election, the person running against them can always bring it up. And they feel like, even though the numbers, we have 60% of people in general, 51% of Republicans, and Democratic voters are in the 70s saying, yeah, legalize marijuana. They still cower to the issue and act like it's something that somebody's going to run against them on. They feel like they can't win. I just seen a story come out like about a week ago. It wasn't really a story, but it was a mention in a story. And the mention was that, yeah, Democrats are still kind of feeling like it's not an issue that they can run on, or if they get caught being on the wrong side of the issue, it could hurt them in an election. And we shouldn't be in this kind of a political environment where elections are so important. I mean, Trump's barely got his ears wet in the White House, and people are already talking about 2020 like it's coming up tomorrow. And before you know it, you're going to see people campaigning for 2020. It's ridiculous. But when it comes to this issue, I just had to pause there and take a minute to kind of give you the picture of the landscape of the Democrats on this issue. But when it comes to Republicans, we have a lot of them that are still on the prohibition side of the fence in the Senate and in the House. In the Senate, you are going to ne'er find Republicans that are going to sign on to Cory Booker's bill. That's my prediction. Even the ones that are really loud-mouthed about it, or, the loudest person so far has been Cory Gardner, and he's a Republican from Colorado, and he's trying to block some appointees. If he can do that, that's pretty loud. But he don't even want he's not even for legalization of marijuana. He's just for states' rights and the fact that the federal government shouldn't be involved in this marijuana stuff. Now that the state has democratically decided, yeah, we're going to do this, and you haven't seen people out in the streets protesting about it being a bad policy, now have you? Anyway, all right, we'll get back to the story because you can talk about this for a long time, man. The Democrats, you can't give them any credit at all. Not at all. Especially when 70% of the people that vote, that say that they're Democrats, say you should be for this shit. And yet we'll see next week how many more people come rushing over to this bill. But when it comes to Republicans in the House, I don't count on there being a big avalanche of those coming onto this bill. Quote, we're going to get the federal government out of the state's business, said Cory Booker in an overture to his Republican colleagues. As to whether the Marijuana Justice Act will be successful, Khanna said, at the very least, it will force a national conversation on the issue. That's what I'm hoping it does. Quote, the highest form of political leadership is shaping a conversation, Khanna said, and Senator Booker and Rep. Lee are providing that leadership. Here's some more quotes. Quote, our country's drug laws are badly broken and need to be fixed, Booker said when he introduced his bill last year. They don't make our communities any safer. Instead, they divert critical resources from fighting violent crimes, tear families apart, unfairly impact low-income communities and communities of color, and waste billions in taxpayer dollars each year. Let's see. The video's not here, but there's a video, I believe it's on this page, but whatever. I pulled it from, and it's on YouTube anyway. So when Cory Booker dropped his bill, he did a 35-minute video about it. So, I was kind of hoping to see the thumbnail here, but it ain't there. But the link will be in the description below. If you want to check that out, it's worth a watch if you got some time to kill. And then finally, Lee said Sessions' move could have devastating effects on communities of color. The Trump administration has made a major miscalculation, she said. And I can't disagree with her more. We have a couple more quotes, and then I'm done with this story, but Booker's bill will get the federal government out of prohibition game by declaring that the Controlled Substances Act would no longer apply to cannabis. So like I said, that's one of the biggest facets of this thing. The bill would not declare marijuana legal in all 50 states. It would simply remove federal illegality and allow each state to regulate cannabis in its own way. States with criminal penalties for cannabis will keep those laws, at least until voters or legislators decide to change them. States with legal regulated cannabis systems would be allowed to continue without the threat of federal interference. Doesn't mention much about interstate travel and commerce, but to me it seems like if it's out of the CSA, it's only a matter of maybe figuring out tax codes from state to state or whatever. I don't know, however they decide to do that with other things. Quote, we're seeing this rush of enthusiasm for legalization from California to New Jersey, Booker said. But it's hypocritical and destructive if you don't legalize while trying to undo the damage done by the war on drugs. And like I said, if you watch that video, what he was talking about there is he's basically saying, you got to do something to help the people that got devastated by this war on drugs. But at the same time, you can't keep arresting people for the shit too. And people that are already in prison, we got to do something about that. I mean, there's not got to be, the worst thing ever is sitting in prison while people are going to the store and buying an ounce in California. Quote, we know who's the most likely to suffer from the revival of the war on drugs, she said. There isn't no revival, man, and communities of color are still suffering every day right now under this war on drugs. How about we stop that one first? Stop arresting people, period, for drugs. That's a dream that'll never come true. And then we can worry about talking about this thing that they're trying to do being a revival. It's a revival on the 80s war on drugs, the Reagan war on drugs, where it was Blitzkrieg style, trying to kick doors in and arrest as many people as you can. And she was referring to disadvantaged neighborhoods and people of color. Quote, the Trump administration has made a major miscalculation, she said, in attempting to revive the failed drug policies of the 80s. Rep. Khanna, whose district includes much of California's Silicon Valley, addressed the economic issues covered in the bill. Quote, the estimates are that the nationwide legalization of marijuana will result in a $40 billion industry with nearly 1 million jobs and a tax base of $7 billion. That would more than cover the $500 million in federal incentives and programs in this bill. It's a net gain. Always thinking about the money. But the economic impact is so much broader than just the $40 billion industry, Khanna said. We're giving people a real second chance by getting rid of that criminal past that is stifling their future. So I'm also going to put a link to the actual text of the bill in the description below. And once again, when it comes down to with these kind of actions, is that people contact, you contact your representatives and tell them to sign on to this shit. Find out who your reps are. I'll put some links below on how you can do that. And basically, just tell them that they should sign on to this, or it might cost them their job next time they're up for an election. That's the serious thing about these kind of actions. When it comes down to, is this thing gonna pass? Is this gonna be like signed into law with Republicans in the House and the Senate, and the president is Republican? I don't think so. No one thought Cory Booker's bill was gonna be like, hey, this is gonna be the one. Everybody's gonna sign on to this and we're gonna pass it. It was just looked at as like, wow, there's somebody in the government that would write a bill like this. And it just kind of like tells you that it's a sign of the times. Like, hey, this is, the people are here and the government's usually way over here. And this time they went a little bit higher. They got a little bit closer to where we're at. And now it's in the House. So everybody can hold somebody accountable for this and see where they stand. That's it. It always has to, something like this has to come to a vote. And there's usually like, here's what you can't do nothing about with marijuana legislation, is when it comes down to it, it has to go through somebody to get a final say, whether it gets voted on or not. That person's not going to let any marijuana legislation get voted on. That's why they put riders in spending bills, amendments to spending bills, to try to protect people. We don't need protection from the federal government. We need them out of the weed game altogether. But thank you, Representative Barbara Lee, and whoever else is involved in this, Khanna, and all the other people that were involved, and all the people that have already signed on to it. The Marijuana Justice Act. So there it is.